We are going to talk about H.R. 1. What's going on in the Senate? What's going on not only in the Senate, in the House as well? But why are they working so hard to change the way elections are done? And to have that conversation, I'd like to welcome in Ken Blackwell, FRC Senior Fellow for Human Rights and Constitutional Government. Also, importantly in this conversation, a former Ohio Secretary of State. Ken, thanks for coming back to the program.
Joseph, good to be with you, sir.
Well, talk to me about what you are seeing in Washington, D.C., because the rhetoric is changing. We've been talking about H.R. 1, but suddenly H.R. 1 is a civil rights issue. Why is that?
Well, first, let's say what H.R. 1, which has been amply labeled now as the Stop the Corrupt Politicians Act, would actually take election authority away from the state and give it to the Congress. And a lot of the safeguards that we have put in place, or that should be in place, to make sure that election integrity is achieved, like making sure that the verification processes and policies stay in place or are reinforced, like voter ID. Make sure that the chain of custody of a ballot, a voter's ballot, is tight and not ripe for intervention and fraud and manipulation. These initiatives embedded in H.R. 1 and S1 would, in fact, nationalize this and regularize the sort of practices that destroyed voter confidence in the 2020 election. And so that's why we've put so much importance on this, is because it is transformational. It would fundamentally change our constitutional republic.
Ken, I got a question about that because of the fundamental change this represents. Is it even constitutional for Congress to tell every state how to conduct their elections?
Well, there's some ambivalence in the Constitution on that, but our practice for 245 years now has been to make sure that elections are conducted at what I call the most basic level of transparency, and that is the precinct level. We vote in precincts in this country because it assures not only a tight grip on verification, voter verification, it also maintains the chain of custody. And so, we have a tradition of making sure that the electors, for instance, in the presidential election are chosen by legislatures across the country. Right. There's no ambivalence there. What the politicians in Washington are trying to do is to make it easier to cheat. What those of us who have been concerned about election integrity have been concerned with, and that is making it easy to vote but hard to cheat. And there's the rub, Joseph.
Yeah.
Loosening the verification processes and policies, loosening the chain of custody, moving the authority all the way to Washington and the Washington bureaucracy and Washington-based politicians really does destroy the subsidiarity principle of government that works best is government closest to the people. And that's why we do things in counties and precincts, and we, in fact, encourage Election Day voting, because that's the tightest way of maintaining a chain of custody, and is also the tightest way of making sure that voters are who they claim to be, because it takes place in neighborhoods where, in the main, people know one another.
That's a really good point, I think, and one worth dwelling on for a moment is a government of, for, and by the people happens close to the people it is of, by, and for, and to the degree that Washington, D.C. takes over the process and dictates to every county and every city and every state how their election processes must be done. The people do have less influence because the government is simply removed from them. Now, one of the issues that is being kind of subsumed or blended with the H.R. 1 debate is with the filibuster in the Senate, because typically in the Senate, you need to have 60 votes to get something passed, and that's because of the filibuster rules. And this has become part of the conversation as well. And Ken, I'm going to play a clip here, and this will be clip 1 from Georgia Democrat Senator Raphael Warnock about why he thinks the filibuster is such a problem in this debate as well. So go ahead and play that, guys.
I'm here to say that this issue is bigger than the filibuster. I stand before you saying that this issue, access to voting and preempting politicians' efforts to restrict voting, is so fundamental to our democracy that it is too important to be held hostage by a Senate rule, especially one historically used to restrict expansion of voting rights.
Now that's Georgia Senator Raphael Warnock, and he's referring to the discussion about removing a Senate rule that's been around for at least a century. What's your response to that comment from Senator Warnock?
Well, when it comes to voting rights, civil rights, major changes in the architecture of elections in this country, you need a clear bipartisan vote. To do away with the filibuster and allow 50 Democrats in the Senate plus the vice president as a tiebreaker to drive this really does fly in the face of a reality, Joseph. This is a country that is as close to being 50-50 as you can get. And in many areas, there are more Republicans than Democrats. For instance, Republicans control more chambers of state legislatures in the country. We control more governorships. We, in fact, have more county commissioners. As a consequence, any move to change the architecture of elections in our country needs bipartisanship, and the one way that you sidestep that consensus-building bipartisanship is to do away with the filibuster, which requires it. And so what you have now are Washington-based politicians trying to change the architecture for corrupt political purposes.
Right.
They would allow for voters without borders. Not only are they weakening our borders on the southern United States, they are now basically saying you can register illegal immigrants. Secondly, it does away with voter ID, so you can't tell legal immigrants from legal American citizens. They're talking about felons being given the right to vote, even if they haven't done the time for the crime that they, in fact, committed. This is just crazy on its face, and it must be stopped. And we can't destroy the fabric of the civil rights movement, which was a legitimate movement, and have it cover this Washington-based single-party power grab.
Those are really good points, and I think as our listeners try to follow this issue, recognizing that there really is, it's one issue that has become two issues, because H.R. 1, as you just described, would disempower every local elected officials. And there's, thousands of local elected officials who right now have a say in how elections are conducted in their city and their county. And this would be the federal government saying, you no longer have a say on those issues. But in addition to that, in order to accomplish that goal, the Democrats are proposing, and many are very supportive of the idea that the filibuster should be eliminated. Now, this is And there's no small irony in the fact that this is months after the end of the Trump administration, where the Democrats spent a lot of time clinging to political norms. And they were so offended because the Trump administration was violating norms. Now, I don't know if there is a longer standing norm in Congress, and I'm not aware of all of them, but the filibuster has to be one of the oldest, longest standing norms in Washington, D.C., and certainly in the United States Senate. And so this is not just an issue about voting, about voting rights. This is an issue of how far the left is going to go to break down the process that Washington, D.C. has long gone through to make something law so they can make that happen.
Absolutely. And our listeners should just remember this. It is in everyone's interest in our constitutional republic to make it easy to vote but hard to cheat. We have both rights as citizens and duties as citizens. And one of the duties that we have is to take the very basic steps to make sure that voters are who they claim to be. That's why photo ID is almost universally accepted across the nation as a given. That's because photo IDs are embedded in our culture, whether we're getting on a plane, taking out a library book, you name it.
That's right.
And so to make the requirement of making sure that a voter is who she or he claims to be as being a suppressive move or to be counter to civil rights fails to understand that we have an obligation to make sure that the integrity of our elections enhance voter confidence in the result. And that's one of the ways that you do it.
That's exactly right.
One of the ways that you destroy voter confidence is that you take away those verifications that have now become commonplace in American culture.
Ken Blackwell, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate your service. Thank you for your time.